What's going on, everyone? I'm just your average, everyday Canadian nerd, here to react to your average, everyday American man, here to react to and learn from proper grammar. A video about high school in Canada versus high school in America. They're both in America. Okay, North America is a thing, and the United States of America is a thing, and Canada is part of North America. So, just to be clear, US versus Canadian high schools. Anyway, it's been a long time since I've been in a Canadian high school, and I've never been in an American high school, so this'll be something. Maybe I can comment on. Maybe I can answer some questions. Maybe I'm out of my wheelhouse. But either way, let's get this picture off of the screen and let's get this video started.
What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical average American here today to react and learn about high school in Canada versus America. Are they different? Are they the same? If you had asked me, I would think things like this, high school, assuming that it's called high school in Canada, like it is in America, would be pretty similar.
Well, I guess that's a good point there, if it is called the same thing, because in Quebec, it is not the same thing. They've got the cégep, which is like our high school, but it's not the same. They have école primaire, which means primary school. Yes. And cégep is a secondary school, or école secondaire. But the cégep is a totally different animal, and I stayed a few weeks at a cégep in Saint-Jean, and I loved it there. It was fantastic, beautiful building. But I don't think that's what we're going to talk about, and let's just keep going.
I can't say I know exactly how Canada divides up the grade levels, such as, or if they even have terms like freshman, sophomore, senior, junior.
Okay, so we do recognize those terms, but they are not the terms that we use. At least not in Ontario. It is known by the grade number. So after grade 6, there is 7, and then 8. After that, there is 9, 10, 11, and 12. We used to have grade 13, which was actually known as OAC, or Ontario Academic Credit, but that was phased out before I had a chance to take that 13th year. Moving on.
Stuff like that for what grade you're in high school. In America, there's 4 grades. You're typically in high school from the age of 14 to 18. And it's considered a pretty important time in your young life's development, to say.
It is. It's a super important time. And I wish someone had actually let us know that when it was our time to be there. So if you're young, know that high school is a super important time for your social and mental development. Stay off drugs. Go to the gym. Keep learning every single day. And stay in school, kids. Moving on.
Say the least. But I was very interested by this video here, where she's going to talk about the differences that she's noticed between Canada and American high school, with the specific declaration that they are very different, which would really surprise me, but at the same time intrigues me immensely. So, with that being said, I'm ready to be intrigued.
Okay, and that's pretty fair because we are governed by entirely different bodies who have very different ways of looking at the world and their youth and education. And then there's the money, which in the United States varies state by state and city by city. Oh, and then there's the whole division, the historical division. Do you know what I mean? I mean the racial division that is historically embedded in the United States society, which has kind of segregated the people from going to one school to another. Okay, so it's not actual segregation in the historical sense of the United States of America, but at the same time, the effects of the past continue into today, which result in some schools being more diverse than others. Moving on.
As you say. So let's take a look.
What's good, guys? I'm Shandi, and today I'm going to be talking about the differences between Canadian high schools versus American high schools. I
Okay.
live in Canada, and I used to think that American and Canadian high schools were really similar until I
Yeah.
went on a trip to Florida and actually talked to some high schoolers and realized that Canadian high schools and American high schools are actually really different.
Okay, so this is perfect.
And this is going to be secondhand information. So, grain of salt.
Setting it up like this. She is Canadian, born and raised, I assume, and had an experience in high school in Florida in the United States and has a bunch of insights. So this is perfect. Perfect.
So I've compiled a list and split them into 4 categories, which are grades slash marks, whatever you want to call it, extracurricular.
Actually, I want to point out that I really like that I believe she's a high schooler or was a high schooler in this situation. So she has lived this rather than it being secondhand knowledge, a lot of it, which is really nice.
And also, this person is young, which is very important because times change. Oh, who knew? And along with the times changing, so do the curriculums, the information that is to be shared, and budget cuts make a big difference. So let's say Peter, who's in his 60s, he will have a different remembrance of his high school experience than I, who is in my 30s, who will have a different experience from someone else who might be in their teens.
Slash events or grades slash marks, whatever you want to call it,
Nope.
and split them into 4 categories, which are grades slash marks, whatever you want to call it, extracurriculars slash events, structures, and others. And also, disclaimer, I live in Ontario in the Toronto region, so some things that I say on behalf of Canada may not be the case for all of Canada. And
Okay.
same thing goes for the US as well. Obviously, I don't live there, so I'm not sure if some of the things on my list would apply to most of the US or just some of the US. These are
And that's a very important disclaimer because, as I mentioned, I don't know anything about the high school experience in British Columbia, for example. I know very little about the high school experience in Quebec. I only have my particular slice, and we're talking about second largest country in the world, so that's a lot of territory to cover. That's a lot of different governments putting their hands in different district school boards, which means everyone gonna do things a little different.
Right. Always good to get those little details out of the way. I also noticed that she said grades slash marks, which is already the first difference. We call it grades in the United States. I've heard of this word, marks. Marks, like they're marking you, giving you a score or a grade.
Yeah.
That is not a term in the United States. But anyway, I'm sure there's lots of stuff like that.
just
It's not a term that's frequently used here in Canada, but again, it is something that we recognize as being a term that can be used. So we might not know that you call them grades. So when we say grades or marks, then we're covering our bases, right?
things that I've heard from other Americans and things that I've heard online. So the category that I'm going to start with is grades and marks. This one really surprised me. So number 1 is that in the United States, A's start at 90%, whereas in Canada, A's start at 80%. So in the US, a 90 would be an A minus, an 80 would be a B minus, a 70 would be a C minus. Whereas in Canada, an 80 is an A minus, a 70 is a B minus, a 60 is a C minus, and so on.
So,
That doesn't sound accurate to when I was in school. But we also didn't get letter grades. We just got numbers.
does that mean that the American grading system is more difficult? More strict? She's absolutely correct. You get an A if you get 90% or better. 80% or better would be a B, but in Canada that would be an A. So it's easier to get an A, but this could be counterbalanced, like if Canadian scoring is more difficult on average. Maybe it is more difficult to get an 80%. Therefore, it's worthy of an A. So there's little things like that that could kind of counter this.
Yes, very important point there, Tyler. Context matters.
But this is extremely interesting to me as well. I've never heard this.
When I found this out, I was in Florida at a conference and the speaker told the crowd to shout out what percentage A started at. And while everyone else shouted 90, me and the other Canadians shouted 80%. And I was like, huh? So that was really, really weird to me. So number 2 is that when applying to post-secondary schools in the US, they look at your GPA, which is calculated using grades that you've gotten throughout high school, whereas in Canada they use percent averages, which are calculated only using grade 12 and sometimes grade 11 marks. And GPAs just sound so stressful because you have to
Yes, and it sounds like a mystery term to us growing up here, like a GPA. What does that even mean?
Huh. This might be smart. I'm trying to give my first impression of it. So in Canada, when applying to college and education after high school, they're kind of judging you based off your marks as a 11th and 12th year student, your last 2 years of high school.
Which to me makes a lot of sense, because you don't judge someone based on how they were years ago. You judge someone based on how they've been recently when it comes to performance, anyways.
That might actually be kind of nice, because at that point in your life, you're more mature and more capable of understanding how important your education is.
And it also displays that you might have had struggles early in life, but those were overcome later.
At that point, and how much your marks will impact what schools you can get into. So I actually like that in Canada. They are judging you more on your older self and the marks you get then. Whereas in America, it's based on your GPA, the average of all of your scores, you could say, in your 4 years in high school, which is extremely stressful for a lot of people because you have to be so good for so long, especially if you're going after that elusive, perfect 4.0 score. Yeah, interesting.
That 4.0. So I understand that's the highest GPA, an average of your grade points. How does 4 become an average, the high average, when you're being rated out of letters? Because letters and numbers don't really correspond well unless you're saying A is 1, C is 3, for example. Then they correlate very well. It's a little confusing. And I think that the average, including your entire high school career, seems a bit silly. Because it's all about growing, improving, becoming better. And you can't be perfect from the start. No one is. No one becomes perfect. Nobody is perfect. How can we expect anyone to start perfect?
To consistently get good grades all throughout high school, whereas here in Ontario, universities only look at your top 6 marks, which includes any prerequisite courses that are required for the program that you're applying to. So most people's averages to apply to university would comprise of 6 of their grade 12 marks, and sometimes grade 11 if you're applying for early acceptances or whatever other reason. Number 3.
Wow. So it's really only the top 6 marks from grade 12.
Top 6 relevant marks from grade 12 and possibly 11 because of relevance. I was paying attention.
Such a small sample size. But it's a sample size taken from like the oldest version of yourself in high school, like I was getting at earlier, being mature. I guess there's pros and cons to both. Because in United States, it's a larger sample size. It is more annoying and harder to maintain a high GPA. But in Canada, then you only have so many opportunities to get good marks, and you're going to be judged based on just those. So, I don't know, pros and cons of both, I guess.
Is that in the US, standardized tests are done a lot more frequently and are taken a lot more seriously. So in the US, high school kids take the SATs, which post-secondary schools look at, whereas in Canada, there aren't any standardized tests that actually matter.
Right, there are some standardized tests, but for the most part, it's the reading comprehension test at grade 10, which is all about the literacy. Can you actually read? If you can read, what does this thing actually say? That sort of detail.
In Ontario, there's something called the EQAO, which is a standardized test that you would take in grade 3, grade 6, and grade 9. But it's not to measure the success of every individual student, it's to make sure that the education system actually works.
Yeah, I mean, this might be one of the biggest criticisms of American education, besides our obsession with rote memorization over problem solving, which is a whole other issue. But standardized testing, that a huge, enormous part of your life and ability to get into a school is going to be judged based off these, gosh, hours and hours long tests that are so stressful for people because people and kids in the United States know how important they are, and they are so boring and so long and so important, and yeah, we take them extremely seriously here, maybe too seriously.
And that kids are learning what they should be learning. So the next category is extracurriculars.
Now, it's interesting she mentioned the EQAO. I don't know if that was something that I did when I was in those early grades of primary school. I remembered many tests. I didn't study for a single one of them because I was someone who paid attention during class, and I didn't know what the tests were. I just did what was put in front of me. What can I say?
And events. So the first thing is that there's no homecoming dance in Canada. And for the longest time when watching like homecoming in movies and TV shows, I thought that homecoming was part of prom. And I didn't.
Yeah, and that makes sense because what does homecoming actually mean? It means you've come home? Okay. So, how does a homecoming dance be a thing if you don't go anywhere? Maybe that's because I'm a literalist, and so I actually break down words into what they literally mean.
I find out that HOCO happens at the beginning of the school year until I started getting a bunch of HOCO vlogs in my recommendations. Like
Homecoming, as in welcome back after summer break. Thank you. I know that now, and you can't take that away from me.
Yeah, homecoming is like a very typical, very cliche, popular, everyone knows about homecoming dances in the United States. Very big part of the high school experience.
And that is not part of the Canadian high school experience. All these dances, usually the dances that I attended suffered from lateral gravity syndrome, which is to say that, everyone kind of went to the walls and grouped up in their social male-female dynamics, and everyone was too scared and nervous to go in the center and to ask each other to lateral gravity syndrome.
That's a good way to put it. In the United States.
Like sometime at the beginning of the school year. And so we don't have anything like the homecoming king and queen either. I feel like this would
Okay.
change from region to region, but my high school calls it semi-formal, and I've heard of other high schools that call it winter formal, and that happens in either November or December. Also, in the US,
Huh.
Oh yeah, because winter can be like really depressing, so we need things to jazz it up, which is why a lot of theater will happen in the wintertime in Canadian high schools.
Yes, well, in the United States, they have formals as well. Lots of formals. Homecomings, proms, lots of dances, lots of stuff. High school kids love that stuff.
it seems like that happens in either November or December. Also, in the US, it seems like people really take Ho seriously. Like people be wearing whole prom dresses, like formal ass dresses to Ho.
Yeah.
Whereas in Canada for semi-formal or winter formal, it's like really casual dresses, nothing too fancy.
Yeah, it kind of depends on where you live and what the culture is around where you live. But I think for the most part, kids do tend to take homecoming pretty seriously. Like it's this very important part in their lives in high school. I mean, at that age, when you're in high school, everything seems like it's the most important, earth-shattering thing ever in your entire life.
That's true, and that has to do with a percentage of years lived, right?
And nothing will be more important when you're that age. So I understand that.
And speaking of prom, number two is that unlike in the US, in Canada, we don't have junior or senior prom. We just have one prom, and that is for the graduating class. Only no
Okay.
other grade can attend or buy tickets. And the last thing for extracurriculars and events is that in the US, cheerleading and football seem like such a big deal. Whereas in Canada, it's like literally the complete opposite.
Yeah, we didn't have cheerleaders. There might have been some football teams, but mostly it was about intramural sports because winter in Canada, and rugby, which wasn't even like that huge, but it was fun. And we didn't have cheerleaders, and there was no culture built around it either.
It's funny how much she picked up on in her like brief experience in the United States high school. I know she said she's talked to people about it as well, but she is so right. But it's really only for those who are involved in it. For a lot of kids who aren't involved in cheerleading or football, they really don't care that much. But for those who are involved in it and it's part of their lives, it is a very, very, very seriously taken, important part of high school lives and their experience, yeah.
And in Canada, we very much value hockey. So we play street hockey, we play ball hockey, we play ice hockey. And when you're on the ice, one thing you don't want is to wear few clothes. So I understand why cheerleaders are not a thing in Canada.
Football, cheerleading, yeah. I mean, what else do you have to worry about at that point in your life? You might as well enjoy the fact that life is simple at that age.
We do have cheerleaders when it comes to our football, the Canadian Football League, or CFL. Instead of any sort of American NFL sports trophies, the CFL plays for the Grey Cup, which is named after a person. And that the Grey Cup games happen when there's snow everywhere. And yeah, I've seen cheerleaders, and they don't look comfortable.
And that football and cheerleading your life can revolve around that for a while. It's fine.
I don't even think that most schools have a cheerleading squad, and if they do, I don't think Canada really has like cheerleading competitions. And football isn't really a big deal either. I think schools take it as seriously as any other sport. And at my high school, we don't even have a guys football team.
What?
We didn't at my school. We had like women's field hockey. We had men's rugby, and we had both genders. Oh no, I said both. Both had their own wrestling teams. that wasn't like a clique kind of activity.
Yeah, it's definitely true that every self-respecting high school in America would have a football team first. That would be like the most important thing for the high school to have, a football team above all else. In Canada, I know hockey is so popular. Are there high school hockey teams?
There was not, because everyone who wanted to play hockey would play in their own local leagues down at their local rinks. And considering, oh yeah, well, we've got a lot of space as Canadians because we have a lot of territory. We don't have a lot of people. So the amount of room for each individual is vast, which means if you have one school surrounded by territory, right? This territory has their own hockey rink. This territory has their own hockey rink, and no one's going to go too far away from their own rink to go to the school's rink, which doesn't even have a rink or a pool.
Is that like our version of a football team? Like every high school wants to have a hockey team? Maybe? It'd be kind of that, the equivalent to that, maybe.
I watch movies and TV shows and think that those massive football stadiums are just a TV thing, but I realized that they're not just a TV thing, and a lot of high schools actually have like those massive football stadiums.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Which is just wild to us here in Canada. We legit thought it was just a TV thing, but now we know it's just a United States thing.
High schools, somehow they find the budget. They can't pay their teachers well for some reason, but they can find the budget to build like a $10 million football stadium.
That's actually really cool. I wish my school did huge sporting events like that because they look really, really fun. But I find it insane that like schools will actually hire personnel just to work as a coach for a sports team. I don't think that would ever happen here, and in Canada, or at least in Ontario, teachers just volunteer to be the coach of a sports team.
And that all depends on themselves. Like, I remember there was a phys ed teacher who wanted to coach wrestling because his big thing was wrestling. And there were other teachers that wanted to coach other things. I don't even remember who the rugby coach was, but he wasn't a phys ed teacher, that's for sure.
That's true in the United States. I think usually it's a teacher who is the coach of the sports teams. That's usually the case. But depending on where you live in the United States, they'll take football way more seriously than others. Some high schools will have a reputation for being the best football team in the state, and they have a lot of kids that go semi-pro or pro after college, and they have a reputation for that, and then maybe they'd hire a coach. But usually it's a part of a high school staff member.
And here in Canada, we have a lot of high schoolers who play hockey and will graduate to a professional hockey league, but they are playing through their local hockey rinks and associations, and it does not go through the schools.
So if no teacher volunteers for a specific sport, then there's just no sports team for that year. Number 2 is that schools seem a lot more strict and disciplined in the US compared to Canada. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a Canadian thing or an American thing. I feel like this might just vary from region to region. At my high school, we don't have detentions at all. And I think if people get in trouble, the school takes more of like a counseling and talk it out type of approach.
Okay, now
I didn't act up when I was in school, but I also didn't have any detention. I wasn't held back after school. I didn't have to come in on weekends. I didn't have to go in the summer. That was all optional and kind of outside of the regular school area.
Now I'm starting to think maybe this is because how do I say this politely? The kids, American teenagers, are so darn rowdy and bad and and mismannered and difficult that American high schools need to be super strict and have punishments and give detention and be harsh and strict to keep the kids under control. Or
Yeah, see, in my mind, that has a lot to do with the military atmosphere. And in military, you do not allow people to be out of line. So discipline is very important, and corporal punishment is not allowed, which means there has to be a lot of other forms of discipline to keep kids in line.
or else the American high schoolers will go crazy and take over. That's the fear. Maybe that explains it. Maybe the Canadian teenagers and high schoolers, although probably, still acting like teenagers, are a little bit more well-mannered, possibly just as a cultural thing. Like she said, it changes depending on where you live, but maybe this is a generalization, but maybe it's true.
And maybe the population density has a lot to do with that. Like, I'm imagining a small town in America, or the United States, right? They might have fewer disciplinary actions needed as opposed to larger school in a big city. And that has to do with population density, the concentration of people in a small amount of space. And where I went to school, I was in the Ottawa region, but my high school was at least a half-hour drive away from where I lived. And that was on a highway going 120 kilometers an hour, which translates to roughly 60 miles an hour, roughly. Roughly. Yeah, I'm not doing the math on that. Let it go, okay? But yeah, 120 kilometers an hour, drive for a half hour, and then that means you're, 60 kilometers away from your school, maybe? Yeah.
Compared to detention, or if it's really bad, they'll just suspend the person. And after talking to some Americans about lunch, I had the longest lunch, so my lunch break is an hour and 15 minutes, and most of the other people I talked to had 30-minute or 45-minute lunches, and a lot of them weren't allowed to leave school grounds either during lunch, and they were only allowed to stay in the cafeteria, whereas we can go anywhere during lunch.
Yes, absolutely. So my high school had a cafeteria, but that's not where you had to go to get your food. Most people brought their own food. Often we would sit in the hallways just by our locker with our friends. Maybe we'd play some cards. Maybe we just talk. Maybe we would go outside, sit under a tree, enjoy the weather when it's actually nice. Maybe we decided we'd go for a walk and go to the local supermarket, buy a rotisserie chicken, and then call that a lunch. Maybe we wanted to go to the local Dairy Queen and get some burgers and such. Totally allowed. Some people even went home for their lunch hour. And yes, we had an hour. Because if you only get 30 minutes to have your meal, can you really enjoy what you're eating? I don't think so.
There's a bunch of...
Sometimes when you're a senior, 12th grade in high school, sometimes on special occasions they'll let you go out to lunch somewhere. But it's usually not like that. It's usually pretty strict. And I feel like this, again, might have to do with the fact that American high schoolers would just take advantage of it and not come back on time and do weird stuff and can't be responsible enough to have that kind of power to even just leave school and be trusted to come back. And yeah, I feel like it's based on that.
The trust to come back to school definitely was an issue, but we didn't have truant officers to come bring us back. Most schools and education systems made sure you realized, hey, look, if you're not coming back to school, you're hurting yourself and your future. You really shouldn't skip class, so come to class. And they just let us do what we wanted to, and we could live with the consequences if we wanted.
food places, there's a Walmart, and there's a mall near my school. So I've literally gone to the mall during lunch. So number 3 for structure is that in Canada, school starts at the beginning of September and it ends at the end of June, whereas in the US, I think that school usually ends in like May. And then they start back up in August. And honestly, I prefer school starting in September and ending in May, because half the time in Canada in May, it's still cold. Like, tell me why 2 weeks ago in May, it snowed. It's getting nicer, but it's still kind of cold outside.
I can't say I ever really paid attention to.
Oh, wow, because when I was growing up in the Ottawa region, sometimes the thaw would come in June. So I wouldn't want to be out of school when everything was still frozen.
To the weather or the time of year that we started school and ended school. Only that we do purposefully time it so that school ends when summer comes because of summer vacation, the 3 months you get off at the end of a school year, and then you come back after summer. So that's the only thing that American high schoolers really care about.
So after summer, and here we really value our warm weather when it's here. So we won't want to send the kids back to school when it's warm in August. We do that in the beginning of September when the temperatures are starting to dip.
So for number 4, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I think in the US they offer AP classes at all schools, whereas in Canada they only offer it at schools that have the AP program. So there aren't that many schools where you can take AP classes. Number 5.
Okay. I would think most, if not all, high schools in the United States have AP classes. That does.
All right, I'm assuming AP stands for Advanced Placement, and basically what it means is university or college, right? Are you on your track to university? Go to the AP classes. Are you going for a college or a trade? You don't need them. Now, I only went to one high school, and that high school offered 3 different levels of classes, 4 if you count French language. So there was the advanced, there was regular, and there was also gifted. And from my observations, in the gifted classes, we moved faster. If there was a subject to be taught, we would spend 1 class maybe. If it was big, we'd spend 2 classes. And when I took a non-advanced class, it was a science class, we spent a whole week learning about how acids and bases interact. And I nearly fell asleep in some of those classes because some of the non-gifted students were asking questions that were answered already. And then they didn't understand, so they had to ask again or in a different way. And then we spent a whole day doing labs or the physical part of science, right? Where we were testing, we were observing. And then we spent another day going over our tests and observations. But in the gifted and advanced sessions, that was 1 class.
It does seem like pretty standard. So she may very well be correct about that. Yeah, because if there's a student who's gifted or wants to achieve more, or even take college courses in high school, one thing America is really good at is giving those students the opportunity to do that, to get ahead, if they have the capability to, which is very nice, very good.
5 is that in Canada we don't have school nurses, and they seem to be in like every TV show. But yeah, we ain't got none. Number 6 is that
No school nurse.
No, that was up to the parents to take care of their students, right? If someone got hurt during school activity, they'd probably get sent home or picked up because, heck, I never saw a school nurse, and I don't think there was any school clinic that was even available if one was needed.
Huh. Yeah, I just kind of always figured that the school nurse was just there, just in case you needed her. Never thought about that. Yeah, every school I've been to has had a school nurse. Yeah, it's just nice.
Like every TV show. But yeah, we ain't got none. Number 6 is that I don't think many Canadian schools have like metal detectors and a lot of security when you enter the school.
No security at all when I was in high school. It was just up to everyone to be good. And yeah, so there were some fights that happened off of the school property. There were some fights that happened on school property, and they were mostly sanctioned fights, like wrestling, right? We never needed anything like that, and when I was in school, there was no need for metal detectors or security, which is why we could carry whatever we wanted as long as we didn't pull it out, show it off, need to use it. It was fine. Which also allowed us to sneak drinks to school. Yeah, sometimes my little thermos didn't have coffee in it. What can I say? Those were good days with the AV Club.
Number 7 is that
Most American high schools do not have metal detectors. That is not a thing.
Okay, good, because according to television, it's a thing.
That would depend entirely on what city you're in. Possibly if there's high crime rates or something like that.
Fair.
Or really depends, and most of the time, there's not metal detectors and stuff like that.
Good, because kids shouldn't be exposed to that, in my opinion.
in the US, I think French is offered, but people mostly take Spanish, whereas in Canada, since we have 2 official languages, English and French, we learn French in school from like grade 4 to grade 9, and then after grade 9 it becomes optional. And in Quebec, which is like the French-speaking part of Canada, they take English. And
from my experience, I was in French immersion, which means as soon as I was in... So we start with junior kindergarten. That was English only. Senior kindergarten, that was French. And then I was in French all the way through my school career. It wasn't 100% French, but I learned math and science in French. I learned geography in French. The social sciences, that was in French. We learned a lot in French, and it really helped learn the language because it's total immersion, which science shows is the best way to learn a language. Hey, you want to learn Japanese? Move to Japan. You're going to learn it a lot quicker than if you stay wherever you are now.
Okay. She is sort of correct. In America, you, right around, the beginning of high school, you're pretty much required to take half a year of a language, which is not much at all. Pretty much 1 year. 1 year of a language, essentially. And you get to choose what language you want to take. It does not have to be Spanish. It's usually Spanish, German, French, maybe Japanese, I've heard of. And it's pretty... I think a lot of kids take Spanish just because we have a lot of Spanish speakers in America, and it's kind of useful.
Makes sense, and that's why we do French here in Canada, because when you can understand French, then that really increases the number of radio stations you can actually listen to. It really increases the number of TV shows you can watch. And when you only get about 10 TV channels growing up in a forest, and half of them were in French, that doubled my TV capacity.
But very rarely do students get a lot out of language courses in America, because you really only have to take it for a year, and then you kind of forget it. And you just take it because you have to. Whereas I really like in Canada, where if they're teaching French or English, in the case of French-speaking students, they're doing it for years and years.
Sadly, it doesn't stick to most people. I am the only one in my family that is fluently bilingual and can speak both languages. My brother... Well, he tries, and he speaks enough French to get by on the work sites with the Québécois that he works with. Québécois is the French term for Quebecers, which is the English term for the people who live in Quebec. Yeah. My sister, she can understand most of what I say in French, but she can't speak it. My mother is learning to speak it, and she can understand almost everything I say. My dad doesn't understand a lick of it, and that's totally fine.
Which is, of course, the way you have to teach a language if you want any measurable level of success and for the language to stick. Yeah, I always wished that they taught language more, a second language in American school. Even though I would have hated it at the time, I would have really benefited from it in the future.
Yeah, most of the Anglophones who had to take a French class just to be aware of the language, they hated it. And they didn't retain anything. Heck, even late French immersion wasn't that successful in teaching people how to speak the other language.
So, yeah, students in America can take French, but they usually take probably Spanish or German even, and not for very long. So it doesn't accomplish much, in my opinion. But yeah, interesting difference there.
Lastly, this is like solely for Quebec. No other place in Canada or North America uses this system. And for the last category, which is other, and first is that in the US, basically everyone calls post-secondary school college, whereas in Canada, there is a very distinct difference between college and university.
Yes, I may have just glossed through that earlier. So college is blue collar and university is white collar. In other words, college is to learn how to do things, and university is to learn how to learn and think and research. So use your brain or use your hands. Hands is college, brain is university.
Number two is that
Oh, I have probably been doing this. Oh boy. Yeah, in the United States, people just use the term college and university interchangeably, like there's no difference.
And here, there is a big difference, and we're aware of it. And I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying they are different for different things.
As a matter of fact, sometimes Americans talk to each other about, hey, what do you think the difference is between a college and a university? Because you'll have like such and such college down the road, and then such and such university down the road. And then you start wondering, well, they're both colleges, they're both universities, it's the same thing. What's with the name? Why is it a different name? So Americans don't even know the answer to that. So it makes way more sense to me, actually, that Canada, there is a distinct difference between a college and university. And now I'm just wondering what that difference is.
Okay, just to briefly recap, college is higher education. University is highest education.
What's the difference? What's the definition, if you will?
people don't say freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior like in the US. We just say grade 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I don't think I've ever heard anyone say I'm a junior in high school or I'm a senior. Like, no. If someone asks you what grade you're in, you would just say, I'm in grade 10. Or...
Okay. I was actually wondering about this. In the United States, you would essentially only use the word freshman for grade 9, sophomore for grade 10, junior for grade 11, and senior for grade 12. I don't know why, because it sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, sure. I learned about those terms through television from American TV, and I only really figured out what they meant after I was done high school.
It kind of sounds, and I swear, at that age, when you become a junior or senior, and you get that title, it almost feels like an accomplishment, like you've earned it, the title of being called a senior, a junior. It has like a ring to it, a power behind it. When you're living in the high school, in that experience as a kid in the United States, it means something to you. When you're a freshman, you feel like, oh God, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. I'm nothing. People will even say the word freshman, like, hey, freshman, you know. like it's a bad word. It's kind of funny how that all that stuff works in the social climate of high school. But yeah, that's very, very, very much an important part of American high school for sure.
I'm in grade 11. Number 4.
Yeah, well, we don't treat our freshmen poorly in Canada. The grade nines are just the youngest, and whenever we would look at the latest batch of grade nines, we'd think, wow, they're so young. That's unbelievable. Were we that young when we were in grade 9? And as a grade 10 looking up to the grade 12s, we're like, oh, they look so old. And then as a grade 12, we're like, yeah, we're not that special.
Is that US high schools and the US in general just seem so much more patriotic than Canada. Like, I think Canada has patriotism, but like,
Okay, so I'm editing right now, and I don't know why I keep saying patriotism. I know it's patriotism. Like, why the fuck am I saying patriotism? But anyways, yeah, just keep watching. Also, ignore my hair because it looks pretty.
I did notice she said patriotism, but
Yeah.
I wasn't going to say anything about it. It's fine.
Rough right now.
but the US has like way more patriotism than Canada. And I find it almost eerie that everyone pledges to the flag every morning in the US. Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of creepy.
Yeah.
I think actually, well, the way that it really works, I think, is when you are really young and you're a very young child in America growing up, you pledge allegiance to the flag. It's a whole, oh gosh, oath or speech that you make in the morning. Everyone does it at the same time. Someone usually leads it, like the teacher or someone, and you say this whole thing where you pledge your allegiance to the flag, and it's this old tradition that I think is somewhat declining in American schools. But anyway, you spend your whole life doing it as a kid in the United States, pledging allegiance to the flag. It's the speech you do every morning.
Comparatively, here in Canada, what happens is around the time of the morning announcements, when you're in homeroom, which is like the class before class, where everyone just kind of takes attendance and you say hi, and this is what we're in for today. These are the things that are happening. There is the morning announcements, and also the national anthem gets played. And we're encouraged to stand hand over heart and to sing along in the bilingual version.
And I think you don't really realize that it's a little strange because you've been doing it since you're a kid. Then when you get to be in high school, you start thinking like, this is weird. I don't really feel like doing this. You start thinking like, do I agree with everything I'm pledging to right now? Because the whole speech has you say a bunch of stuff that you may or may not agree with at that point. You're a young adult. So to her point, I think by the time you're in high school, some kids do think like, oh, I'm not even going to say this anymore. And, I haven't been in high school in a while. I don't even know if they're still pledging allegiance to the flag. I assume they are. But it's very much like an older tradition that a lot of kids in the U.S. do just because we were taught to do it and not for much other reason. So,
And in my experience, the whole Canadian anthem at the beginning of the school day really is a reflection of how we go through the national anthem at the beginning of a hockey game. Yeah, we're a hockey-centric culture. It's true.
interesting point, though. Interesting. Good to think about.
In Canada, we just stand to the national anthem in the morning. Except for Quebec, they don't do that. I find it so weird that some US schools have military scouts like right in their high school. It's definitely not a thing in my region, but I don't think it's a thing anywhere else in Canada.
Yeah, and you don't have to pledge allegiance to the flag and say the thing if you don't want to, by the way, which is good if it makes you uncomfortable. And yes, there are pre-military programs in high schools because the United States is constantly wanting to recruit people into our military because we're the United States, and that's just what we do.
And lastly, teachers are just paid better in Canada. I'm not sure how reliable this is, but I read somewhere that in like some southern states, teachers can make as little as $15K a year, and that is absolutely ridiculous. Like, here in Ontario, minimum wage is $14 an hour, and you can literally make more by working a full-time minimum wage job than being a teacher, if that piece of information is true.
And our teachers are horribly underpaid here in Canada. So to hear that teachers make even less in the United States is baffling.
I don't know if that's exactly true. $15,000 a year would be pretty much insane.
That's below poverty.
But I absolutely agree with this statement. Teachers, by and far, in the United States, are paid horrifically. Terrible pay. Doesn't make any sense at all. They have one of the most important jobs in our entire society, teaching the next generation of people, you know? The next generation of kids in our society. Your children, you know? They're teaching them. They are growing with them every day. They take care of your kids. They teach them. It is such an important responsibility. And it's not easy. It's a very difficult job to do well. So with any other difficult job, you get paid well. Except when you're a teacher, doesn't make any sense. The United States government needs to change that, because pretty much all high schools are government funded, if I'm correct. So that's pretty much on the United States government. You know, stop spending so much on the military and give 10% of that to teachers, and bam, we can 5x their salaries, and it'll help everyone, because they'll probably be more incentivized to be there and do better and care.
Incentivized, but also patriotism. You know, whatever. I'm just being pedantic. I don't care.
But for now, if you become a teacher in the United States, it's really just because you love the job. Your love of the job, and that has my utmost respect, for sure.
You could have a whole teaching degree and make $15K a year from your job. That's ridiculous. And that's all that I have for this video, I think. And that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I like learning about the differences between America and Canada in general, because I find the cultural differences interesting, so I definitely enjoyed making this video. If you know any other high school differences between the US and Canada, just let me know in the comments down below. And if something I said...
Okay. Oh, I think that's pretty much the end.
Well, except for her very Canadian ending, which is, if something I said was inaccurate, let me know. If something I said bothered you, let me know, because I don't want to be inaccurate and I don't want to cause trouble. That's just me guessing, because she's a good Canadian from Toronto. What can I say? Well, one thing I do want to make sure I say, again, is our French words of the day. So, let's recap. French, the word school is école. École. The word primary is primaire. Primaire. The word secondary is secondaire. Secondaire. So we have école primaire and école secondaire. French words of the day.
That was by Shandy. And I like that.
I like Shandy too. Good stuff.
I like that a lot. I think that was a great video. That had a lot of really interesting, true points. At least the points about the United States were true. I'm assuming everything she was saying about Canada is true.
Absolutely. I didn't find anything wrong with what she was saying about the Canadian high school. I mean, it matched with my experience. Totally.
And if so, this was fascinating. I never would have imagined there were this many differences. Some little tiny little details that you would never have expected. These little differences between Canadian high school and American high school. It really made me think and analyze stuff a bit. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of interesting differences. that I don't think you could really appreciate or even know, except for someone in this position making a video like this, someone who has experienced both types of high schools or talked to people about it. So I really enjoyed this. This was unique to me. This was very interesting. Anyway, if you found this video interesting and unique and special, feel free to leave a comment or give it a like. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada, Canadian culture, things
him
in
reacting
Canada
to us,
stuff I've never seen before,
me sharing
feel
information,
free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Yes, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you notice that I'm trying to do better, right? Which means pausing the video when I have something to say, which means following up on my Canadian French words of the day, which apparently are a thing people would like, and trying to give just a little bit of perspective, because I recognize that not everyone who can listen to me is in North America, let alone in Canada, so it's very important that I be as precise as possible while also being informative. Anyway, that's it for me for now. I enjoyed today's video. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm glad to be back here after just not being well for a few weeks. I'm feeling a whole lot better. I hope you're doing even better than you were last week, and I hope y'all just keep being awesome. Bye.
Science, spirit, life. Nerd Pope King.